Jesse Sylvia. This name coming up to me and over again. I'm getting his name all the time. Jesse Sylvia, Jesse Sylvia. I look in the coverage. This whole show is Jesse Sylvia. Yeah.
Very nice. Very nicely done.
Thank you. Good Charlie impression.
Yes. Welcome, everybody, to the latest installment of the Two Fish at the Table podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Ben.
And I am one of your other hosts, East Coast Sam.
And we are here this time around covering the first half of the ESPN episodic coverage of the 2012 World Series of Poker main event. And I am probably more excited about this one than I have for any one we've covered up until this point. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking forward to 2011 because, as I mentioned last time, that was the one that I had the least knowledge about. So it was interesting sort of reviewing that one to sort of fill my knowledge in. But yeah, I mean, 2012 was one that I had my eye on for a while. Greg Merson, I think I'd say that, in my opinion, he played the best in terms of his entire tournament performance out of all the main event winners. That's been my impression of him in years past. And then obviously Gaelle Baumann and Elizabeth Hille both putting on very strong performances with plenty of drama along the way. That's not to say that, players like Jesse Sylvia didn't do a good job in their tournaments either. But yeah, I mean, Greg Merson really definitely is the star of the show. So I'm sort of curious. Obviously, we're only going to be reviewing the first half of the coverage today, how the second half fills in and whether I hold true to that opinion or not.
I mean, I really like this main event, just the history behind the just what happens during the confines of this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this coverage is perfect by any stretch of the means, but it's definitely top two, maybe top one for me from what we've covered so far. I actually think there's so much good happening in these 24 episodes that
Mm-hmm.
it almost suffers from a lack of focus or a lack of consistent A to Z storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, I mean, we'll be covering the first 12 episodes, which takes us for days 3, 4, and 5 of the tournament. And we're going to go over this, but this particular main event does share a lot in common with the 2011 main event, both from the tournament and from the ESPN broadcast nature of it. I think for the most part, after they had done this Maury Eskandari revamp of the show, this was kind of them settling more into that new formula.
Mm-hmm.
The growing pains of 2011 were, for the most part, ironed out, not 100% ironed out. And as far as the changes in the 2012 main event compared to 2011, what stood out to you the most?
The changes. I mean, as you said, perhaps facetiously last time, you said that this is sort of the sequel to 2011. And I do agree with you. We have a lot of personalities like Ben Lamb and Sam Holden, surprisingly, being sort of the big holdover from 2011. In terms of the changes, I mean, there weren't too many that we can really talk about. We have Lon and Norm now standing in front of a green screen with like coverage of like the feature table behind them, which I think is a really odd creative choice. It looks kind of sloppy. On the other hand, we get Joe Navarro, who last time gave the Poker Tells segment. They've sort of changed his sort of style of presentation. He's sort of just like standing in this black room, like he emerges out of the shadows. He's holding a tablet computer and he's talking about how like, oh, you can tell that he's like propping his elbow up. So that means he's strong or whatever. I like how they sort of present that. Kara Scott's given a little bit more to do, so that's sort of nice. But even still, like, her interviews, it's just sort of mainly bust out interviews, and then she'll give sort of brief, like we want to say like maybe 15-second segments to the camera summarizing a player. That doesn't really give us that much information that we couldn't hear in another context, like Norm could have said it, or Lon could have said it, or they could have presented it in an interview or something. And then the interviews are now just, the players are sitting in front of green screens just kind of talking, and they'll sort of just throw them in randomly, just sort of sections of them in front of a green screen, sort of asking, being asked a question and answering it, which is fine. It gives us the information quickly, but again, it sort of loses that personality. Last year, they were going out to Colorado, they were going out to Belize, filming the players.
Well, they did that a little bit. They did that a little bit in 2012.
Yeah, but they're not doing it as much.
No.
I feel like they're
more towards the end of the coverage on 2011.
Mm-hmm.
But a couple of things you actually missed, so maybe you didn't notice it, but the pro analysis segment is now exclusively held by Phil Locke and Antonio Esfandiari, a role that they will both share for the next couple of main events together.
Mm-hmm.
And considering it means no more of the mediocre Andy Block or other random, I mean, Phil Galfond was okay, I guess, in 2011, but Getting rid of the riffraff for that segment definitely was improvement, because the two of them, they're a natural kind of duo. They had on other television projects together, so that was a bit more organic, and their analysis is definitely a bit better, and they don't just recap the hand like any vlog would do, which was a big letdown. Another big change was the elimination of day 8 from the tournament. So the actual structure of the days was a little bit faster. Day 3 had 5 levels instead of just 4 levels. So you imagine transplanting one extra level into a tournament would speed things up, and thus day 8 became superfluous. It did create the possibility that days 6 and 7 could drag out longer than normal. But actually reading the blogs, it didn't really factor too much into those 2 days. Additionally, hands are more frequently interrupted by a commercial break mid-hand, often when someone is pondering to make a big call or what to do in a situation. And unfortunately, this would be followed by kind of a recap of that hand when the commercial break was over. Obviously, on Poker Go, it's not really a commercial break, but that was definitely a unusual idea to kind of, I mean, people's memories that forgetful if they're watching poker on ESPN, I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, they do that a lot with like reality shows. Like with Mythbusters, they'd always do that. Remember how they'd like go to commercial break and they'd come back and summarize it? I don't know why. I mean, it's just a poker hand. It's not that hard. They also added new graphics, or they'd like show like snapshots of a hand or snapshots of a player at the table, which I thought was kind of slick, but also a little unnecessary.
A new segment was called Mic Check, where a player, pretty much from the day previous to their supposed coverage on one of the featured tables, would be shown in a quick montage. And it was meant to emphasize the table talk or the social dynamic of that player at the table. But the problem was they just did not either. I mean, maybe the people that they picked, it's kind of random. They pick someone for one level, so it's 2 hours. So it's a crapshoot if that even ends up being television worthy. But regardless, they end up using some very kind of brief, middling at best sort of content for those characters. And so again, not a huge fan of that segment, but they're trying to mix it up. I mean, considering that oftentimes table talk at the featured tables can be kind of scant, having a montage of supposedly amusing table talk could have been a good idea. But again, I'm by no means saying the 2012 main event is perfect. These are just kind of the and for the most part, these segments are pretty short, so it's not taking up 2.5, 3 minutes of the episode. It's maybe 1 minute, maybe 75 seconds tops.
Yeah, I mean, they did a very good job sort of just moving from hand to hand, very little, they would just say, okay, we're going to the feature table now. Sometimes they would cut away from the feature table and say, we're going to go back to the feature table, which I thought was a little weird, but still fine. I mean, they're just moving through it very quickly. No, advertisements at the end that take 45 seconds to read off, though they did have this segment where like, you're waiting for like a code word or something and you can type it in on some WSOP site and you get like a free seat into the 2013 main event. They did that once an episode, which you can kind of just skip through on Poker Go, but it's like, all right.
That's the one like every main event seems to always have that one substantial advertising block of time. And that was specific to 2012. I think that was also carried over into the following main event, if I recall correctly, but I could be wrong about that. I think that kind of covers the biggest changes in the production and the tournament and the segments and everything. Obviously, you mentioned before that 2012 in many ways functions as a sequel to 2011, and I think that is best exemplified in the day 3 roster of featured tables, because much like in 2011, we get Daniel Negreanu at table 1.
Yep.
Ben Lamb, not at table 2, but he is kind of featured semi-prominently on the other tables in this episode. And Negreanu notable to having a lot more chips on day 3 compared to the year prior, where he wasn't short, but definitely was in that sort of middle ground where you're not a big stack, but not a small stack. And Mr. Robert Peltecki, one of our favorite comedy moments from 2011, joins Negreanu at table 1. And they actually do have a little bit of a back and forth in their limited action on display on table 1.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great segment right in the first episode where it's just about Peltecki, just so many famous people. They just do a montage of different photographs of him.
Robbie Diamond.
Yeah, and he's just covered in jewelry. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that the actual hand coverage of Negreanu on table one in this episode is far stronger than a lot of what we saw from on day three and the year prior. A
Hmm.
couple of hands, Negreanu makes some big hands, chips up a bit, and then in perhaps the most brutal hand of day three, Negreanu flops a top set of aces and gets rivered by a straight and ends up paying off a substantial all-in on the river, and exemplified best by Lon McCarron's "ouch" once Negreanu says "I call." And possibly the funniest part of this whole exchange is Negreanu kind of has his tongue like out of his mouth as he's like looking at his hand and trying to look at the board. And he's like, and then his tailmate kind of leans over across the table and like tries to look at what Negreanu's hand is. It's a pretty funny moment.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, this was I mean, we've sort of criticized day three in the past. It's sort of an awkward part where, when we previously had days one and day two, right? Day one, it's like you're introducing to the new players for the season. You have, old classic players with great personalities being showcased because they probably don't run deep. Day three, sort of this in-between day. We're not quite at the money yet. We're not quite before the bubble yet. So there's no real natural tension, and we're sort of after that introduction point. But I feel like day three this year was pretty well done. I feel like we had a pretty decent amount of, old players like Ben Lamb, who we could admire. AJ Jejelowo starts to emerge. We see a lot of Gaelle Baumann. She's introduced right off the bat in the first episode as having a big stack. I think they do a pretty good job showcasing different personalities. Esfandiari gets a lot of coverage as well because he just come off of his big win. I think this was a pretty good day three overall.
Well, to your point about Esfandiari, much like how Ben Lamb and Grinder in the Player of the Year race were kind of the background storylines of the main event. In 2012, probably the two most prominent stories bubbling was Esfandiari coming off of his $18 million big one for one drop win, a tournament that was broadcasted live on ESPN, actually. Unfortunately, not on Poker Go. Come on, guys. And the other one was the previous tournament, essentially, from the main event, was the 10K Six Max tournament won by a Mr. Greg Merson. And so one of the subplots being that Merson's playing an extra long tournament of which he's not been knocked out of yet. And
yeah, and they don't really bring that up initially, which is interesting. I mean, they mentioned
but the background context, I think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah,
and plus, of course, winning a bracelet and making a deep run in the main event is a lot of Player of the Year points. So Merson having a legit chance at Player of the Year, being again in the background, more pertinent later in the tournament, but nonetheless still something worth mentioning. And on your point, Esfandiari, he's on table two, and the first half of day three is really kind of the Esfandiari runs table two show. He ends up just really kind of in smooth sailing in almost every hand he plays. David Tuchman is his table neighbor, as well as Ricardo Lubis, or maybe it's Gerardo Lubis, who was one of the big stacks to start day three. And David Tuchman, a regular World Series of Poker, or really just poker commentator, he won a spot in my good graces for his longtime work in the commentary for regular World Series of Poker events that prior to Poker Go were broadcasted for free on a live stream on worldseriesofpoker.com. And for some reason he gets a lot of flack, but I guess internet people kind of draw those kind of comments, even if it's unwarranted. I mean, I like his voice. He's got a pretty good voice. He's very articulate and very, he's not a top poker pro, but he knows enough about the game that you can tell that he knows what he's talking about. And he can, both announce what's happening, but also, throw in, I wonder if this will happen or that will happen from this raise or that. So and so this is really kind of the only time he's ever in the main event spotlight. So, and again, he gets a big blind special in one hand, where I think that the commentary by Norm during this hand is absolutely hilarious, because he's just basically riffing off of whatever Tuchman's doing with his maneuvers at the table. When both fingers touch his nose, he usually checks the river. Just pretty funny for me.
Yeah, they get plenty mileage out of just not making fun of Tuchman per se, but just sort of joshing off of the fact.
A little improvisation kind of commentary style.
Yeah. And we, speaking of funny people at the table, should we talk about Mr. Kevin Pollak?
Why not? Why not?
Yeah, so Kevin Pollak, who he's an actor. I've never seen him in anything, so I can't say. I think he was in a Kevin Smith movie. I don't remember. But yeah, he sort of gets a lot of coverage because he's the sort of Hollywood celebrity of the year. Previously, it had been Jason Alexander, but now it's Kevin Pollak. And yeah, I mean, he's not doesn't get too much coverage in terms of poker playing on day three. It's a couple of hands here and there, but he's sort of focused on as like the funny guy to beat. And Norm, I think the funniest parts of his coverage are just Norm sort of riffing off of it and sort of his personality becoming like a little insecure that this guy's having a deep run and now he's like the big comedian who's great in poker. I just think that was the funniest part of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, Negreanu's table breaks after the first episode, so we get a brand new table one for episode 2. This one highlighted by some pretty big names. We have Ben Lamb, who had been bluffed by Vanessa Selbst on the outer tables in episode 1 in a big pot, where I guess Vanessa Selbst, we're gonna talk about her plenty, but she is one of the de facto main characters during the duration of her stay in the main event.
Of course.
Ben Lamb, of course, coming off of his third place finish 2011. Chris Moorman is also at table 1 for episode 2, and later on David Randall, who become the chip leader at one point on day 3, joins that table. And can we just talk about Chris Moorman for a second here? He is one of the most peculiar players I've ever seen in a main event episode. I mean, he has a very impressive chip tower. We had a big stack on day 3, but he always bets to get back change.
That's true. Yeah, I never really noticed that.
And Norm calls him out on it, and he'll grab like 5K chips, which is worth 25,000, and say 24,500. Like, dude, what the heck?
Why not? I mean, yeah, he's just an interesting player. I mean, he calls, what was it, a 4-bet all in with pocket tens on day 3. I mean, he's just a crazy guy.
For the longest time, he was one of those players in the list of like best players to never win a bracelet. He won a bracelet recently, so he's off that schneid. But so yeah, he kind of gets some decent tension here in the big cameras here. Table 2, though, I think has the highlight of the entire episode: a amusing hand by Papa Levy against Antonio Esfandiari, where some of the best table talk by somebody who goes all in with the worst hand, but thinks he has the best hand and wants to get called, ends up meeting his demise because Esfandiari makes a tough but correct call of trip queens when Papa Levy had 2 pair aces up. And again, it's just a really funny exchange they have after result. His huge river shove on the river.
Yeah, he goes, "You're the greatest player in the world, and you have to figure out what I have." Like good he's read. Laying down the gauntlet.
Good read. And then the whole table is like smiling, like laughing at this guy because it's Esfandiari is the one being out talked for a change. Yeah. And so, and also another kind of an interesting character to show up on table 2 is Mr. Croak, the creator of Silly Bands, which, as a former camp counselor, I was witness to their popularity amongst the children of 10 years ago or so, and he does get to enjoy the wild card hand spotlight with a win, but Norm takes the spotlight here with his comments, "I'll be a monkey's uncle and an aunt."
Yeah, Norm gets it. We should mention that the wild card hands are back. There's sort of same format with multiple choices, and Norm actually gets quite a few of them right, so kudos to him.
I mean, we don't know for sure exactly the production of how those were edited or made, but let's just pretend that it's real and that
let's give
it was real guests.
Yeah, the props.
And again, just kind of a side note because it was so funny to me. And at our tables, we see a hand between Maria Ho and Matt Berkey, and they were at the same table in the main event this past year. So I just thought that was really funny that happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah, during the 2021 main event, they were, I think, table 3 at one point together.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Berkey lost the hand against Joe.
Yeah. And then Esfandiari, we do see about his spray tan business in an amusing bit. Not all the bit. I mean, some of the bits were okay for me. This one was okay. Esfandiari is a very charismatic guy, so anytime he's talking about, spray tans, I'm listening.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure his spa closed, by the way. So if you want to go and visit,
Darn it. Episode 2, we do get our first sighting of Greg Merson. One point that this main event definitely had over pretty much all of the ones before is that the final 9 definitely pop up sporadically much earlier in the overall timeline than years past. Merson being, of course, one of them. And the main event does kind of cheat a bit because they just introduce random interviews like at the intros of episodes with like Salaburu or other people that we haven't really formally seen in the poker action yet. But it's a somewhat shrewd maneuver to get those guys in front of the cameras early on.
Yeah, and Balsinger also pops up at the top 10 list. He's 10th, but he's still in there. Yeah.
Yes. And so again, we're kind of zooming past these first 2 episodes, but overall, these are pretty solid as far as the first day of a main event that we get to watch in the main event, span. It's pretty good stuff. Ironically, though, we get a brand new table 1 on episode 3, this time with Kevin Pollak highlighting it. And it's definitely the Kevin Pollak show. It's by far the best featured table content we've had that was headlined by a celebrity player. If you ask me, he gets, pretty he talks a lot. So whether it's mid-hand, during a hand, he's in the hand, he's not in the hand, he's talking. And for the most part, it's funny, even if it's not like ha funny, it's amusing.
Yeah, I suppose. Like, I don't know.
And amazingly, he was actually the chip leader of his table to start episode 3, a pretty low on the chip count table overall. But at this point in the tournament, I mean, I guess you'll take it if you're the chip leader.
Sure, yeah, of course.
And we had mentioned before, but this year's main event does keep the formula of, for the most part, having 1 episode for 1 level of tournament action. Oftentimes with 1 level squeezing in at the end of an episode to kind of get a big bust out hand or a big all in before the credits roll. And again, you have 5 levels in 1 day, so you have 4 episodes. So you're going to have to squeeze in an extra level in there somehow.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that this episode is the Kevin Pollak show. I'd also argue that the sort of second act or number 2 of it is Mr. Somerville, who really goes on a tear. Yeah, really goes on a tear and starts sort of accumulating chips and a lot of attention. He's sort of seen as sort of one of the young guns to beat of the tournament. Is sort of built up in the coverage.
Yeah, absolutely. And Somerville does have a segment where he goes into his coming out situation in the poker world, which I guess, 10 years ago, you don't really think about the poker world as this world where that would be as big a deal. But, then again, you think about it, it's a guy dominated, profession game still at this point. So I can see how that might actually have been a big deal at that time too.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also get a great look at Sean Deeb's grandmother's home game. And Sean Deeb, that whole story is just kind of funny. It's kind of a part 2 of that from 2011 where he bought her into the main event. So that was a kind of a fun little sequel to see.
Yeah, it was sweet.
The pro analysis, they actually now this is a etiquette sort of weird situation where if a player accidentally raises, often by putting out the wrong number of chips or the wrong color of chips or misunderstanding the action before them. In this case, Kevin Pollak accidentally raises when he meant to call, and his opponent just calls it, and Pollak kind of shoots him a little head nod like thank you. And the pro analysis by Locke and Esfandiari say that whenever this happens to you, you should always re-raise or take advantage of that situation. And I don't know, I feel like maybe it would depend on what kind of guy or how that miscall was performed, but I would never do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, even Norm calls them out for it. It's like it's just not right. And especially with Pollak being an amateur player, it seemed to have been an honest mistake. If you're being angle shot, then that's one thing. But if it's just an honest mistake.
We saw Chris Moneymaker have the same problem a couple of years ago in the main event, and he ended up losing the hand. Ironically for Pollak, he ends up winning a bigger pot because he won the hand. Right. He does do his little spiel of I had one of those, but I had one of these too. And then Norm, of course, said, well, one of those wasn't good, but one of these was good. Yeah. So again, it's an etiquette thing. If I have the nuts, I'm going to probably re-raise it. But if I don't have the nuts, then I might not, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get a fresh table 2. So again, this day 3, a lot of table breaking up and switching around more than possibly any day 3 we've ever seen, really any day of the tournament we've seen before.
Yeah.
Where we get Somerville, Micheal Dentale, Kevin Song headlining this table. And Dentale, he's again one of those kind of talky, like probably like New York Italian, cocky, arrogant poker players that we see from time to time. And again, he's very entertaining to watch. He has an amusing dynamic with Mr. I forget his first name, but Telcher.
Mm-hmm.
But Telcher goes all in with the best hand of a queen high bluff, and Dentale has to time an ace reg again. So again, it's an okay episode in that we have some amusing tables to watch here.
Yeah. And Ben Lamb does depart from this mortal tournament at the end.
He had a pretty big stack when day 3 began. I think around the 250K range, and just kind of down. Trying too hard to repeat the year prior, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, he did better than Pia Signs, so I give him credit there.
So the last part of day 3, we actually have the same 2 tables. It's the first time we have some consistency across the 2 main tables. And going back to how we had that sort of etiquette of the accidental re-raise situation, I think we get probably the most floor man poker etiquette, etc. kind of moments that we've seen in a single main event, all in just this one main event here, because not to be outdone by Kevin Pollak, Micheal Dentale has to take issue with a tablemate who kind of puts I'm calling them motion gates, where he kind of goes back for an extra chip after he had put a few chips forward and had touched the felt, which was the matter that Dentale took the most issue with.
Mm-hmm.
But I was watching the physical action of the tablemate when he did that, and it didn't seem that bad. It didn't seem all that often to me. He was kind of like looking at his stack and then like, I didn't think it was that bad.
Yeah, I didn't think that was off at all. I think it was just sort of him irritated over how the tournament was going or something. Because I didn't know.
I mean, he had pocket deuces, so that's not a hand that you're probably super excited to have to put an extra 5K pre-flop in. But he actually makes a questionable call on the flop with the deuces, and then turns a deuce when his opponent had already flopped 3 jacks. So he ends up basically putting his foot in his mouth by trying too hard to kind of get back on this guy in the same hand that he was taking issue with his etiquette, I guess, in the hand.
Yeah, weird.
So again, that definitely one of the 2 highlighted hands for me in this episode. Well, I guess each. So I divide every episode into table 1, table 2, and the hour tables. I think all 3 levels have one very, very amusing hand. That's the table 2 version of that. Table 1 has the infamous polar bear joke hand, where Kevin Pollak pre, mid, and post hand tries to tell like a story kind of polar bear style joke, and it just goes wrong in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, as we mentioned before, like we're both sort of fans of Norm Macdonald and that sort of style of like storytelling comedy, and it's kind of like a dad joke, and you get to the end and there's a corny punchline. It just doesn't work because he has to stop in order to think about the hand and put out chips and stuff. It's just Pollak wins the hand. Maybe that joke helped him win the hand. You got to do what you.
Well, when your opponent calls you on the flop of 6 high, it makes things pretty easy too.
That's true. It's just very weird.
But I mean, if we're talking about weird hands, I think what is emblematic of the weirdest, possibly the craziest hand in a lot of ways in the entirety of the 2012 main event is on the outer tables, our boy Mr. Henry Tran against Ben Alcober, who had been the chip leader for a brief portion of day 3 earlier in the day. In a raising war pre-flop, 3 deuce against King 8 suited, Alcober with obviously much more chips than Tran. And not only is the commentary funny, the table reaction afterwards funny. The whole hand is a classic.
Yeah, if you haven't seen this hand, I mean, I think Poker Go has it in their like top hands of 2012 list. It's a meme. You can find it anywhere. Just everything about it, just the core quality of their hands. Norm's commentary is hilarious. Van Tran rivers the deuce, right? He goes, "Oh, the deuce." he made the
deuce, Juan. A pair of deuces never loses.
Yeah. And then Then Tran, he's like, looks into the camera. He's like, I'm only going to show this hand if I win. And then he
I always
calls.
notice that if I win, I might hand Tran really thinking about this, and then it's like a 600,000 chip pot or something like that, at that
Yeah,
point.
something like that. Yeah.
And it's like maybe like half of Alcobert's deck maybe, and Tran, that's kind of part one of his two hands that kind of drive him into the top 10 of the leaderboard. This just streaming on the end of day 3. This is again one of the last few hands of day 3 for the whole day. And so Tran really trying to stick it to this guy with this young kid, this crazy young kid. And again, we don't see as many crazy young kid kind of play in 2012 as much as kind of 2011 we saw so often. But this is definitely a remnant of that style of play.
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely cooling down. I mean, there's some players that are mixing it up with sort of any two. They keep mentioning Vanessa Selbst, who is going to come back a little bit later, that she's sort of the player who can mix it up with any two and is dangerous. But for the most part, we're seeing people sort of stick to sort of premium hands or something like suited connectors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we definitely had a variety pack of featured tables for this day 3. There were some pretty memorable hands. I wouldn't call it fantastically amazing, but I think it was very solid considering how often those early episodes of Main Event can kind of drag out for the early viewing.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And so into day 4, again, 4 episodes covering day 4. The bubble episode is actually entirely in day 4, part 1. The blinds being 2.5K and 5K. The introduction of episode 5 does kind of have a montage of people's thoughts on the bubble and what that means to poker and what it means to them.
Yeah. I mean, we get Johnny Chan and Eric Lindgren sort of off to the feature table. They're sort of the stars of the feature table. We also start to get the emphasis on sort of women in the main event. Vanessa Selbst, this is sort of her first time. She's been mentioned previously, but this is her sort of first time in the spotlight. But yeah, I mean, as we've said many times before, I always enjoy the bubble episode just because of the natural tension that builds up to it. Seeing the players change, seeing who's going to step up to the table and become sort of more aggressive and try to take advantage of the smaller stacks, seeing the smaller stacks trying to skate by and make the money. It's always just sort of an interesting dynamic to see. And Johnny Chan is just sort of such a naturally just aggressive player, and he's a legend and he has this sort of reputation around him. So seeing everybody else just sort of try to tiptoe around him is just really fun to watch.
I agree. And also, even Johnny Chan alters his play a bit in accordance with the bubble, because a very salty Vivek Rajkumar gets angry at Chan for his Hollywooding when he has a set when Rajkumar is kind of bluffing with Ace King High. Right. And Chan, his response is like, "Oh, I don't want to finish 6-6-7." Like as if this is like the be all end all for Johnny Chan to bubble the main event when he's winning twice. I mean, come on.
2 main event titles and then bubble boy.
I mean, the actual bubble play is better and exemplified in the table 1 and the outer tables play. Table 2, it's not really all that relevant to start off with. Table 2 has Vanessa Selbst kind of table captaining table 2 with the other big sack being Mr. Karam, who will, and they'll have these two will have very contrasting style or journeys throughout day 4. That entire table 2 will remain intact for the duration of day 4. Pretty much from this point forward, it was the producers or maybe the tournament director's emphasis on having a woman at table 1 or table 2 at all given times. Right. Which on day 4, there were 12 women left in the field in the money. And so, and again, we'll get into the ones that make the deepest run, but that's a pretty substantial number as the day 4 would continue to go on. Eric Lindgren, we've seen at feature tables pretty regularly the last 5 main events or so. He doesn't have the best day 4 to start off with. He ends up and down to start off with, and then he gets crippled when he overplays a pair against a set, and I think it's like top pair by King Queen against a set, and he gets crippled down to 1 anti-chip. And he says, and then of course Lindgren kind of joking it off, like, yeah, if I want to chip in a chair, I'll clock him. and then in just one of the funniest hand reveals of all time, the very next hand, Lindgren is all in, and he flips over his hand. He's got 2 kings. You'll believe what I've got, 2 kings, and he runs into 4 deuce and double, and well, I guess non-U pulls up,
Right.
as Norm calls it, and he has almost enough for one big blind. Now Lindgren would bust. I think that one of the like very very quickly after that. He might have been the small blind the hand after, or the big or something. So one or two hands later, he busts just
Yeah.
shy of the money. Given his money situation, he really could have used the extra 15 grand probably.
Ooh, ouch.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
All right.
The actual again, we said this is the bubble episode. This is probably my top three, maybe top two, or even I don't know, one of my favorite bubble sort of segments of an episode,
Yeah.
because on the bubble we get to see some outer table action with Esfandiari and a bizarre who can kick the highest bet with a pretty portly man who I'm surprised had the flexibility to kick that high in the first place. Because Esfandiari is kind of a tall, lanky guy, so he definitely has the leg ascension to kick pretty high.
Yeah, they do a prop bet who can kick the highest. Esfandiari does win against some guy, Brian, who I think won a bracelet earlier that year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then 4 bubble boys. I mean, geez, like that always just breaks my heart.
As will kind of be the style going forward for bubble episodes. We just kind of go through all in versus all in. This one's either out or in. And Norm punctuates each bust out with the bubble boy wears a hoodie. Bubble boy wears a Chiefs jersey or whatever.
Right.
And we actually end up, and then Norm gets exasperated because in just the first hand for hand play bubble situation, 4 bust outs happen. And
right.
because of that, and they're all on different tables, they end up splitting because there were 3 out of the money. So they all split one person's worth of bust out min cash money. So they all get almost half of their money back, which I guess is better than if you were the one bubble boy and only got the free entry to the main event the following year.
I suppose, yeah, but still, I mean, it must.
What would you rather have? Would you rather have $4,800, or would you rather have a free ticket to the following year's main event?
It's a tough call.
I mean, you could say you cashed in the main event.
Yeah, but like, I think I'd rather get entry into the next year.
Okay, I mean, if you were going to enter next year anyway, then I guess fine. But if it wasn't a guarantee that you were going to go back and play the main event.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point.
That would be my tipping point for that situation.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier that the mic check segments didn't really work. There is the one mic check segment I do like in the coverage is with Freddie Deeb, just because he's a very sort of naturally personable guy. He even like calls his daughter on the phone and it's like, hey, there's this guy at the table. Like, do you want me to connect you to him? Like, that's the one like mic check segment I liked. And it comes right after the bubble. So it's kind of like a nice relief from that.
Mm-hmm. The other segment I think I want to point out is the Vanessa Selbst highlighted interview where she talks about women in poker, goes over her roommate situation, who she was living with for the main event, and so that was again. This is the year. This is the main event where it's like the year of the woman, if you ask me.
Right.
Because of the, even and it's not just like having a token female in the making a deep run. We had numerous women playing well, getting shown both their good hands and their bad hands, not just their bust out hands, and so good to see that Vanessa Selbst was our bridge into that sort of themed of the main event. We had seen Gaelle Baumann when she was the day 3 chip leader, the first time a woman had been the chip leader for day 3 in the entirety of the tournament's history. Elizabeth Hille, we start to see a little bit more and more of her as day 4 goes on. She would, gradually accumulate a big stack as the day would go on. And off screen, we see David Tuchman lose a massive pot to Henry Tran, a 1.3 million chip pot. Tuchman had been the beneficiary of a big Esfandiari bluff on day 3 and had a solid stack for day 4. And just in that first sort of wave of eliminations after the bubble burst, Tuchman meets his untimely end. And he talks about it in one of his commentaries for an event maybe 7 years ago, where he's like, oh yeah, I had the nuts, and he remembered the nuts. So it's a shame, but nonetheless, off screen, a lot of the hands I would have loved to have seen occur off screen, unfortunately, because I know too much about the history of this main event to my own good.
That's a shame. I would have liked to have seen that.
Yeah. And then so episode part 2 of day 6. Episode 6 is part 2 of day 4. Blinds again, 3K, 6K. We say goodbye to the lovely 500 chips, and the 25K chips at this point are regularly featured. The same 2 tables. as the episode prior. And Michael Esposito, who will be a final tableist in this main event, briefly joins table one for the action. It's kind of the Johnny Chan. So the episode's kind of an old school character classic episode because some of the main characters really are Daniel Negreanu, Johnny Chan, and Antonio Esfandiari. And again, kind of that classic, nostalgic, old school player wave headlining this episode. It's kind of a refreshing theme, given how we were already trying to move away from that sort of population of players in the main event coverage.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the narrative for these older players now is, they have to deal with all these online kids. How do you navigate the field when, you've been playing poker for 30 years, but there's some guy who's 23 years old and he plays 1 million hands a week. So how can he's experienced, he's more experienced than technically you are. So how do you navigate that? And, Chan holds his own. I mean, he's not, this isn't his 1988 performance where, Barnstorm's the main event, but he holds his own, and we definitely get a good sense of his personality. Again, he doubles up. We also, should mention that Vanessa Selbst is also getting sort of more toward her, poker playing than just her personality, her being a woman, and she comes off pretty well.
I mean, so she definitely dominates table two with her play. The table never really kind of fights back against her. When they do, she fights back even harder, and they kind of end up folding. If you pay attention, like very carefully to her chip stack pre and post hand, you'll see that she actually loses some hands off screen. So they were trying to gaslight the audience into making it seem like she was winning every hand, because Norman Lott, they just completely like hype her up. They're always like, it just seems like she's thinking about things that other players aren't even aware of. Her like, this is probably her total chips she's bluffed off as it exceeds the gross domestic product of like Greece or something. Like just all these lines. And again, I'm not saying she's a bad player. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's definitely an uneven sort of editor or spotlight on her. Granted, things will even out a bit more as the coverage goes on, but again, I think it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And moving on, I guess just to episode 7, because it's a pretty basic episode moving on through the middle of day 4. We get a brand new featured table with Henry Tran at this point now second in chips at the table, like 1.6 million or so, which again, the blind's 4K, 8K. It's a huge stack. Most of those courtesy of David Tuckman. One of my favorite characters, rest in peace, of the 2012 main event is Matt Marafiotti.
Yep.
He and Tran kind of have a pre-existing relationship as far as poker, and they're both from Canada, so they had some commuter history to tournament. Later on in table 1, we get one of the funniest lookalikes in main event history, Odell, who is a Norman Chad lookalike. Absolutely, to me, I totally see the resemblance.
I thought Marafiotti also looked like Tobey Maguire.
A little bit, pre-Spider.
Yeah, pre-Spider.
Marafiotti and Tran are kind of will form a duo that will, a lot of the attention in episodes 7 and 8 are about them. Marafiotti spends the first part of episode 7 doubling up the shorter stack Klevitz, who has some pretty dry humor table talk. I can't remember if I'll table if I lose that hand, so I guess I kind of have to win the hand, And then, again, going back to one of the other recurring themes of this poker etiquette rule breaking or floormen being involved in the action, Henry Tran's hesitance to show his cards in the hole cam. And I will defend Tran, actually, because it often seems like when the floormen are called in to clarify a rule, they don't really clarify it how I would, or in other words, they don't actually communicate the correct rule or the correct logic behind that rule. So when they show, so Jack Effel grabs the player contract to show Henry Tran what the rule is that Tran was having an issue with. He was saying that the tournament can publish your whole cards. I don't think that means you show it. So it's gonna be some other rule that he should have been showing him to clarify that point.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, Effel's also giving I don't want to be mean to Jack Effel or anything, but like, you know, in the years past, he's kind of made bad calls and he's been a little bit sort of abrupt with players. And this is sort of just another example where he like doesn't even entertain Tran at all. He's just like, you know what, you keep talking back to me. You're saying that I can't speak English, so you get a 1-round penalty.
And on that point, there's obviously a slight, you know, Asian American or Canadian language barrier there because Tran, I think he was being totally innocuous in the sentence that Jack Effel took such issue with.
Yeah.
Tran was trying to say, like, you know how to speak English. It's a very common phrase. And then Jack interpreted as, you just told me I don't know how to speak English. And that's not what Tran said at all.
Right.
And I don't think that particular part of the whole situation was responsible for the 1-round penalty, but I'm sure, you know, thumb on the scale, it didn't help.
Yeah, it contributed to it.
And again, Tran, that was as close to trolling the whole table in the pre-Kasuf era as it gets. Tran is in the big blind when Chanrisi Kuhn makes a smallish raise of 7-6, and Tran has the chips to make the call, the exact amount. He takes 2 of those chips back and then puts in the chips that were left in his hand, like very slowly. And then when the dealer says 2 more and Tran says 2 more, can I take it back? Like he's just trying to stall it even longer. And so Tran obviously was out of line, but for me, again, with my dark sense of humor, I think it's just very funny stuff.
Of course, it's hilarious. God, pre-Kasuf.
Yes. And so Tran ends up ultimately getting bluffed. Yeah. And ironically, I could not, so the WSOP blog did not have a entry for that hand.
Really?
And I was stunned. I was like, where did I miss it? Did I go back? And I think they're trying to just get it out of the history books entirely. And I refused to not call him out for that.
Oh man, Tran's a legend.
Yes. And then trying to outdo his quote unquote friend, Matt Marafiori does the most Bush League fake shove you'll ever see mid hand when Matt Marafiori is pondering an ace queen suited hand in a pretty busy pot with a lot of action pre-flop. He kind of looks towards Chanrisi Q and he's like, and then makes it that fold. But again, it's just the most Bush League amateur, like pathetic antics at this table. And yeah, it's so entertaining for me.
Of course, yeah, it's great. It's just horrible.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. So Johnny Chan does go busto on the outer tables, as does Chris Moorman. Elizabeth Hille and Gaelle Baumann, again, are usually pretty much once an episode shown at some point, every episode, the best they can do. Table 2, we get some more Karam, who was again the chip winner to start on table 2. Just down, down, down. I call BS on Paris. You are not shoving if he bets. There is no way you were shoving if he bets because he didn't have enough chips to like bet and then not be expected to make the call. No, there's no way.
Of course.
He's full of it. So full of it.
Face. Yeah, of course. Crazy.
And then the Lawn Memorial hand, Pocket Jacks, kind of gets its official sort of christening in a segment of this episode.
Yeah, no one's heard of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we get the very first Nico Mag joke of the 2012 main event.
That's true, yeah.
Norm is just this guy we haven't seen ever. He's like, you must look out for Nico Mag. And then episode 8, the last part, day 4, blinds 5K, 10K. This might be my favorite episode of the entire main event.
Oh, okay.
I love this episode so much. It's just so. I'll let you talk about it because I'll just praise it to the heavens if I speak. So you go for it. Tell me your thoughts on it.
Okay, well, we do have to talk about the Marafiotti segment. I know that this is a little later in the episode, but like Marafiotti he's just listing off all the things he's bought. He's got this like how expensive was his watch again? Like several $100s. The car he bought for like $10,000.
Everything is like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. Like
the segment ends with him saying, "I'll let you decide if I'm a baller or not," which is just like that's just an epic line.
How to not be viewed as a baller is by saying that.
Yeah, I mean Norman, Odell, the Norman Chad lookalike, is talking about Ace Queen, and Norm's like cringing. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty good episode. I don't know if I would call it the best episode of the main event, but yeah, I mean, pretty good. We
Well,
get,
it's one of the most nostalgic for me, and maybe that's kind of putting my thumb on the scale for that. But
yeah,
it opens with Timothy O'Dell talking about his Norman Chad story about Ace Queen and getting $1 from Norman
yeah,
Chad, and then that's just hilarious. And then we finally get the side by side picture of the two of them, and then Norm wants, I want the dollar back.
yeah.
Tim O'Dell then wins the wild card hand with Ace High, and the guy who looks just like Ray Romano, I swear. This guy named Johnson looks a dead ringer for Ray Romano, which I'm surprised they didn't bring it up given they were comparing Norman Chad to O'Dell. Yeah, he makes a bad fold, and Norm was correct that O'Dell was bluffing because O'Dell, we had seen a little bit in episode 7, he was over 1 million chips and working his way down to less than a million, working down to under 1 million chips with his play, very aggressive. O'Dell goes very crazy for king high flush draw against Klevitz, where we get the for me it's a very quibble. Will he stay or will he go? Brick. He will stay, and then Klevitz gets to double up, and the whole table's like, what? Tim O'Dell for king high flush draw goes, I was gonna make it 350, so like 448, I call.
That is a weird one, yeah.
Yeah. And again, some more Selps action on table 2. This crazy raising war of ace jack against 9-6 against Johnson, who actually lasts pretty long in this tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe it's a crazy raising war of Selps. That was probably most emblematic of the hyper aggressive Vanessa Selbst gameplay of day 4.
Yeah. And then Kevin Pollak doubling up and jumping out of the table, and you can see in the background Merson and Hille behind him. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, I agree. And also, the start of the infamous Merson versus Elizabeth Hille rivalry, where Hille gets the better of Merson every single time. So, Rick Merson, again, we talked about him. He played one of the best games of any main event winner in the ESPN main event coverage we've ever seen. He makes an amazing fold where he mucks 3 aces when Elizabeth Hille raises him all in on the river of a flush, but it's Merson, you can just see in his body language. He knows the instant she raises, he just looks like he's dead. He puts his chips on his stack. It's like, I think Merson's body went limp.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then I guess the big stack up at this point is Mr. Paul Volpe, a very accomplished pro who has won. And it kind of has this rivalry of Sean Deeb. I feel like they fought there where they end up pulling each other heads up for a bracelet. And, kind of the other big stack on the outer tables. But that last hand, so good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of the funniest, craziest, worst, best all-ins of all time. Matt Marafiotti had won a couple of pots to kind of get back from a short stack up to a respectable 300K, 30 big blinds. On the very last hand of day 4, he's saying, is our hand better than aces? I'm only going to play something better than aces. And under the gun, he raises all in with 32 big blinds of ace king suited. Sam, take it away.
So Mr. Norman Chad calls with pocket aces, or I should say insta calls. And you're thinking 6%. This is the end of Mr. Marafiotti, but he gets there with the flush and he starts running around the venue like he just disappears.
No, but he puts his legs together and does it's like bunny hops. Like yes.
Yeah.
And this is like 2 hands after he had gone all in of queens pre-flop. I'm a nit. I'm always ahead. And so that was kind of his image, was he's only playing the premium of premium cards.
Yeah.
And Tim O'Dell takes it in pretty good stride. I mean, he does his great like eyes closed head shake when he says the flop has 2 hearts on it when Marafiotti all those outs. And Marafiotti has this weird shirt with like a just giant pocket that's like sewn on top of the breast part of the shirt. And so Norm, of course, punctuates the hand with, I'm surprised if the pocket falls off his shirt at this race.
Yeah, and we do see Jesse Sylvia showing up, and for whatever reason, like it's with Claudia Crawford, who's shown previously up against P.S. Hines, and her like entire shirt is like blurred out, and it's the worst blur out job ever. Like it's just this like chunk of blurred out as she's like walking along. It's very strange. Like they blurred her whole shirt out.
Yeah, there's an art to the blurs, and ESPN doesn't normally have to show anything that needs to be blurred. It's not like a hidden camera reality show or something. So.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, I guess.
Yeah, it's funny. It took me out of the moment. I'm like, what are they blurring out? Like her whole shirt's blurred out. But yeah, Jesse Sylvia shows up. So it's the silver lining.
I mean, so this episode's really the rise of the ladies and Marafiotti.
Yep.
Again, I have a lot of nostalgia for this entirety of this day 4. I mean, I do think that the second half is better than the first half.
Yeah.
I mean, just Marafiotti. I mean, Tran doesn't really do much after episode 7's events. But again, I'm a little bit biased, but I really like this day 4.
Yeah.
But we get a complete reset of the field on day 5. So I think around 300 players or so remaining at this point. We get a fresh table 1, a fresh table 2, with the blind 6K and 12K. Daniel Negreanu back in the spotlight. He had been kind of in the background for all of day 4. Maybe he appeared for 1 or 2 hands over the course. Again, he got a lot less of the spotlight in 2012 compared to 2011. It was only on table 1 on day 3 for 1 episode, and even then it was only maybe 3 or 4 hands.
Yeah,
that he was involved in, and he only won like I think 2 of them. And so again, Negreanu back on table 1. Chance Corneth, who recently had a very deep run in the main events this past summer, or I guess fall. Sorry, this past fall, was there. We get Omar Saeed and JP Kelly, a couple of guys that made some pretty deep runs in the previous main event. So again, you're seeing a lot of these players make consecutive deep runs, making it look easy, I guess.
I suppose so, yeah.
I actually don't have any notes on table 1 for this episode. It's all about table 2. This is a pretty awesome table 2. I think it outshines the whole episode, with maybe one Marafiotti exception on the other tables.
Yeah, I mean, this was a pretty good table 2. We get right off the bat, we get, Sylvia calling, let's stand up and do the ESPN thing. Yeah, I think that was a cute line.
Gavin Smith?
Huh?
Gavin Smith is here. Lucky Chewy.
Gavin Smith here, yep.
We get Hamnet, who was briefly a table mate of Ben Lamb on day 3.
Yeah.
He doesn't last very long, but he's there. Jason Somerville joins. We get also AJ Lolo, who was kind of in that Sam Barnhard in a spotlight where he had won a tournament prior and that's almost like contractually obligated to be in the coverage more than maybe he needed to be, at least at first.
Yeah, I mean, he had a bunch of chips. He sort of gets a lot of attention because of his last name, AJ Jalolo. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Gets a lot of attention for his last name, and sort of playing. They sort of have this sort of running theme where it's like he keeps getting called because everybody thinks he doesn't have a hand, which they kind of sort of try to establish. I know
AJ Jinja bluff stuff. AJ Jinja, oh no.
No, exactly. Yeah, but he seems like a personable guy. Like no problems with him.
I mean, we do see one of the grossest full houses in history where AJ Jalolo makes a full house of 9-3 on the flop against 10-9 by Klevitz. So we had seen get a couple times on day 4, so you'd think he's in a deep run. But that's how you blow 1 million chips on day 5 is overplaying 10-9.
Crazy. And
the first episode of the Somerville 2 Outer Special occurs where he binks the river with against a very tilty Amir Zolkowicz.
Yeah, I would be a little tilted.
Red card. And it's like, wow. He hits the table. He's just like, and then he puts his hand on his head, and just like, you can just see the steam coming out of his head.
Yeah, except for Somerville, to his credit, knows he got lucky. He's not rubbing it in, so it's just
it's just an amusing little wow.
Very cute.
And again, some amusing stuff on table 2 of this episode. as well as the beginning of the Luck Donk Box story of Jesse Sylvia, where he overplays ace-3 suited with a new candidate for the worst 6-bet all-in of all time.
That is, yeah.
Because first it was ace-7, then it was ace-6, and now it's down to ace-3. So aces are getting weaker here.
Against JJ Lolo, but up to this point, it's like he could do no wrong. He's walking between raindrops. He has pocket kings against ace-3, and he loses. I mean, it's just
and Sylvia has like a million, like a 1.5, 1.6 million with the blinds, 6K, 12K. That's over 100 big blinds. And his actual all-in motion, I just find so funny. He has a big side. He's like all in. Then Lolo has kings. Of course, he's not going to fold the kings, even blind versus blind.
Right.
And this is pretty brutal. But again, JJ Lolo doesn't really, freak out, much less so than Zolkowicz did when he lost. And again, he had so many chips that this was a big blow, but it wasn't a crippling blow.
Yeah.
The only other hand really that I have any affection for from this episode, though, is the pretty wild bang bang Matt Marifiotti hand, where Marifiotti and I forget the guy's name, but Kaufman. Kaufman makes one of the most bizarre all-ins of ace queen on the flop with no draw, and Marifiotti gets unlucky in that his opponent hits the turn, but then hits the river. And he goes, "Yeah, how can you be so stupid?" And Marifiotti, again, just one of those arrogant, too big for his britches, young guns, and expensive watch or not, it's just not how I would ever behave at the table.
He says, "How is this guy shipping ace queen there? I guess they don't care."
I mean, now to be fair, it's a pretty atrocious shove.
Yeah,
Kaufman puts in 80,000. Marifiotti's snap raises at 200,000. Kaufman only has about 330,000 to begin on the flop, and he puts all in for only another. It's almost a min raise by that point. And Marifiotti obviously is not going to fold 2 overs in that flush draw.
right. Yeah.
To any raise. Now even if Kaufman thought that Marifiotti had a pair of 8s or something, I don't even know if Marifiotti folds that. So it's just a terrible shove. So again, from like a impulse, not thinking about it point of view, yes, it's an awful play, but I'm not going to badmouth the guy. I mean, it's just I'm happy he made mistakes. That's all point of poker is. You want them to make mistakes against you, and then you get the benefit from it.
Yeah.
So, So again, table 2 outshines the whole episode, if you ask me.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Cool. For episode 10 next.
Yeah, let's do it.
So episode 10, we get the 8K, 16K level, and very quickly, 1/3 into the episode, we get into the 10K, 20K level. Negreanu hanging in there, not a ton of chips. The very first hand, though, of this episode, we get perhaps the world record for the most times the word Stratomatic is said in any episode of television of all time. Negreanu doubles up, playing 7-6 from the big blind, and finally kind of has a comfortable-ish stack, about 700,000 or so, which is playable definitely for his style of poker. And
I mean, that first hand, I mean, Katona calling with a straight draw. I mean, it's just like such a bad call. I'm sorry. I hate saying stuff like that, but I just think like, oh, come on.
Well, this guy has the most awful soul patch on his face. So maybe a soul patch is a kryptonite for a poker player. I don't know, but nonetheless, definitely not a hand I would play like that in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Negreanu off the bat, but we get a good Gavin Smith segment where he's motorcycling of all things, while also talking about being a father
of twins.
Changing
of twins.
Twins, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, you said twins in the bit.
Okay, I must have missed that. Yeah, it's a very sweet segment that's a little bit, gets a little bit sweeter given that he is no longer with us. Rest in peace. But yeah, I mean, we get quite a few, sort of little Gavin Smith moments here and there, but no huge moments. Marifiotti does bust toward the end. Good mix of things.
Well, speaking of busting, Negreanu makes this is top 3 most painful hands to watch in this main event. This is number 3 on that list for me. Because Negreanu makes this light call of 2 4s against Kyle Bowker, and I mean, could you fold there? When I first saw that hand like almost 10 years ago, I was like, this is an awful call. You got to fold that. As I've gotten older and more wise to the poker scene, the call makes more sense to me, but I think that it's a fold for me.
Yeah, I mean, so Negreanu raises pre-flop to 44. Bowker
Five fours is a tell.
right, that's a tell, right? It goes check, check on the flop. Turn gives Balcor the set. Negreanu bleeds out for 91. Balcor calls. Then Balcor bets 210 on the river. I mean, that's tough. I mean, I don't know. I think I could get away from it. I'm a tight enough player that I can.
I mean, it's half his stack is to make the call, and there's a huge difference between 23 big blinds and 11 big blinds.
Yeah.
Negreanu busts 30 minutes later in the tournament, shoving his shortened stack of king queen suited into Pollock's ace queen. Which, by the way, I can't believe Pollock played that hand like that. But
yeah,
that's separate. And the pro analysis actually is for that hand, the fours against deuces hand.
right.
And Negreanu also talks about the thought process of Carrasco after he busts.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them, I mean, I get it. I know people love to bluff in this tournament, but you have to think that why is Bowker trying to bluff Negreanu?
Right.
Because Negreanu is a bluff reading machine. So I think there's more levels to it. You have to eventually take your time, buckle down, and make the right decision.
Yep. And then
so Negreanu does match. I mean, it does exceed his finish from the year prior, from 2011. You know, making the final 200 or 160 or 170 or so. We didn't even mention actually this main event. It had 6,528 players playing for a total of 8.5 million. So again, they had settled into that sort of 60 something hundred or 7,000 ish players for this decade for the most part. Negreanu, you can play great for 5 days, but it doesn't matter if you play the last hand poorly.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about poker. You can play really well for a while. If you just make one or two mistakes, that's it. That's the nature of no limit.
Yep. On the outer tables, we get two very misleading occurrences. One is they hype up Hille as becoming the chip leader after she busts a player. And that was not true. She was not the chip leader at this point in the tournament. Really? I was looking at the blog posts. Kyle Karanen and Rob Salaburu were both over 5 million by this point. And so the leaderboard that actually showed up Hille at the top with like 4.7 million was inaccurate.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Still, I mean, it's pretty. I mean, it's still awesome that Elizabeth Hille was accumulating that many chips. But again, it's misleading. I want to point it out.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
And this guy Greg Merson, I don't know if you heard of him, but he went down to 53K in this episode.
Yeah, 2.5 big blinds. The very next hand he doubles up. But 5 big blinds, won't matter, right?
Poof, they'll be gone.
Yeah. Episode 11 is the second half of day 5 with 141 players left. Mm-hmm. Still, I think at this point there were like 5 women left. Susie Zhao, rest in peace. Top. Claudia Crawford. Oh no, I think she was out by now.
No, Crawford's gone.
Crawford's gone. Yeah. But we have Elizabeth Hille. You have Gaelle Baumann. I think by this point Maria Ho was already out though, so maybe it was only 4 women left. But regardless, we have 4 women left. We have one at table 1, Susie Zhao. Kevin Pollock kind of hanging in there after winning Negreanu's chips. Jeremy Osmus does join this table, as does Jason Somerville. He gets transplanted from table 2 to table 1. And then we got a brand new table 2 with Eric Hellman, Aaron Kaiser, who will be the topic of much tanking in 2014, as well as Jean-Yves Malherbe and Michael Gable.
Oh.
And so Susie Zhao confuses Kevin Pollock to start things off for Joe Pesci, which, I mean, that's just funny.
He looks similar enough to Joe Pesci.
I don't know, maybe
enough of a resemblance.
I don't know. I think she thinks all Americans look alike. That's very racist.
Oh, ouch. Oh, come on.
I'm just joking. Come on.
Yeah, we do. We have to say goodbye to our friend Pollock with a very sick hand. Queens versus Queens.
Versus Queens against a guy that had been accused of slow rolling earlier on day 5 when he was slightly slow to flip over his off-suited aces. And
Right.
they act as if it's a slow roll. I mean, had they seen Hilton Laborda from 2011? That's a slow roll.
That is a slow roll.
I think that was not as big a deal as people made it out to be.
Yeah, I mean the Pollock busts, sort of the celebrity is gone, but Pollock is amicable enough to give an interview with Kara Scott and says, how spectacular it was. And
Yes.
we mentioned briefly that he's the one that busted Negreanu. He was like legitimately like heartbroken over busting Negreanu, but he was like, he's my poker idol. Like he's shaking his head, like as he's collecting his chips. It's like a sad moment almost. Like you'd think that he'd be a little bit more excitable, shake Negreanu's hand, aggressively or something, but he's like actually broken about it.
Yeah, I mean, he says it's my poker hero. There's no enjoyment out of that, and so, but yeah, they both go out in the same sort of bracket of the eliminations on day
Right.
5. Unfortunately, the kind of the talking point at this table on day 5, though, for table 1 is the etiquette of using your one time.
Oh yes.
Whether to use it when you're already ahead, or I mean, if you're all in, it doesn't really matter. If you gotta win, you gotta win. It doesn't matter because obviously, the cards are gonna shift in the deck if you say one time out loud. So you have to, be polite when you ask the deck to help you.
Yeah, and Zhao used up her one time. When she went all in, she'd already used it, but she gets there anyway. It's almost like this whole one time thing is just like it's just made up.
I know, right? That's strange.
Yeah, and they do a segment about the most overused phrases in poker. They talk not just about one time, but also when somebody says, "That's poker," and also "It's so sick," which they've already done in the past. They did like a nut segment on one time and stuff, which is, it's fine to do that segment again, but it's just like reusing content is just always something that, yucks me.
The other, we had some more poker tells in this episode, and I could not stand the poker tells segment in this entirety. I hated it. I think it was just being way too just taking something someone randomly does and like making a big deal out of it. I don't buy it.
Yeah, like Syed, like in this one, it's like Syed was kind of like this or something.
Yeah.
And like wrapping around his sleeve, like that's like him like clutching a security blanket close to his face. So that shows that he's like
a strong hand. It's hiding a strong hand, not hiding a weak hand, which I think it doesn't matter. You could think either way. It wouldn't matter.
Yeah, it's just weird.
Micheal Gable gets a bit about how he has 6 kids and his mom died recently of brain cancer.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of the main character because we didn't really have a true main character in the same vein as we had in previous table 2s.
Yeah.
And he kind of has this mini rivalry with Hellman. Gable very kind of loose and aggressive and weird bet sizing, and he wins some hands off screen, so otherwise he'd play a fewer chips. Hellman in the wild card, this is probably my favorite wild card hand, not for the actual hand play, but the talk after the hand is over, because Hellman kind of gets salty with Gable, who's kind of arrogant with his win. Is like, I wanted to think I had the 6. That's okay. Thanks. And then Hellman. I mean, Hellman's. I don't know. I like Hellman, even though he does cut the head off of Gable in another awfully played hand by Gable.
Yeah.
You tell me how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad that hand was played by Gable.
Yeah. So Gable has 7-4 diamonds. Hellman has 10-8. Gable raises pre-flop to 50. Hellman calls. The flop comes out, giving Hellman top 2. Gable has just a flush, and I think it was a bottom pair. Was that right?
No pair.
Oh, no pair. Okay, sorry. So just a flush draw.
It was like 10-8-3, I think it was.
Okay, yeah. So sorry about that. Yeah. So Gable puts out 150.
More than
Hellman raises. Huh?
The pot was like 148, so that's more than a pot size bet on the flop.
Right. Hellman decides to just raise to 379. Gable shoves over him. Hellman calls, and obviously Hellman holds on. But it's just like, it's a bad play. It's a terrible, terrible play. Why are you betting for 150? Why are you not? When the guy raises to 379, what do you think he has? What do you think he's bluffing? Like, I don't get it.
You call it a big blind. You could have like King 10. You could have Queen 10, Jack 10. there's
Yeah.
a lot of things you could have, and it's just not. Also, and Gable was like, he was interviewed by Kara Scott saying like, "Oh, you had to go for it." He had a 1.5 million chips. The blinds were only 12K, 24K, and they were talking about how, I didn't feel comfortable going to day 6 of that many. There's a whole nother level left to be played. It's not
Right.
like it's the last level of days. And even if it was, who cares? You have chips. If you had, I know maybe he wants to play a big stack game. He doesn't quite have a big stack, but you can't base a whole entire hand play out by by how many chips you have when there's still at least like probably 3 hours to go in the whole day.
Yeah, it's he just lit his stack on fire. I mean, that's just it. Like, it's just it was such a weird interview after the fact. Yeah, I mean, it's like, what are you doing? Like, I just don't understand. Like, I'm just exasperated. I'm like, what are you?
I mean, we got a good sense of his character. I did like
Yeah,
the character of Gable. I mean, he kind of comes out of nowhere, but he was amusing to watch for while we had him.
yeah.
But it's just it hurts right here. It hurts in the poker part of my heart.
Oh, of course, yeah. Like, oh, if I had that many chips, I mean, I would be picking my spots so carefully. I would never even be playing 7-4. It's just,
I'm with you there. And then the final portion of day 5, episode 12, the blinds at 15K, 30K with a 4K ante. The last time we'll ever have that kind of level in the main event will be this
Mhm.
tournament. And with 5 women left, so I guess it wasn't 4, it was 5 women left in the field. And we get a fresh table 1 and table 2 to conclude day 5. And you can imagine, again, with fewer tables left, the chance of a table being broken goes up. So you're going to see these tables break down more and more regularly when you're comparing across episodes. And so we get one of my favorites, Marcel Lusk,
Yeah,
at
he's
the featured
back.
table. Sam Holden, the remaining November 9er of the year prior. Chong had busted, so his sort of consecutive back-to-back attempts at going back there was over. Salaburu and Kyle Karanen, the
Yeah,
number 1 and number 2 chip stacks at the table. So again, probably like 13 million chips are at this table,
yeah.
and that is unbelievable at this point in the tournament. We also get Amit Makija, David Peters, and Marcia Top.
Hmm.
So pretty good, pretty amazing table, honestly.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
can't believe they have to get that all together. Table 2, Vanessa Selbst, Michael Esposito, Asare, Sam Savril, who
Hmm.
is fake. Oh, I didn't know you did that. Sort of final table antics have been a recent Poker Go video feature.
Yeah, that was, oh God, that hand was so painful.
And so it's a pretty busy table 1 action. Lusk goes nutty, not nutty, but aggressive with pocket 10s, putting in the majority of his chips in pre-flop and somehow actually getting ace king to fold pre-flop to it. So that's
Right.
pretty impressive stuff. But this is kind of our spotlight into the Celeburu antics of the 2012 main event. One of the by just a sheer of his table presence, one of the most prominent and standout performers of this main event.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't mention this earlier, but he knocks out, like, I think it was 2 players in a hand, and like, I can't even describe. Like, he makes this noise. Yeah, like this weird noise as he's collecting the chips. Like, not quite rude, but just like not like off kilter. And so we sort of just get that sense from him just throughout the entire main event, just this sort of off kilter guy. Not quite rude, but also like not quite funny in the sense that like Marcel Lusk is, like he's sort of playing up to the crowd.
Yeah.
And Salaburu and Lusk are sort of, goofing off with each other at the start of the episode. It's pretty funny. I like that part.
Yeah, and Celeburu wins a ton of chips, busting David Peters. He kind of tilts him with like a min bet, and Peters goes way too nutty of 10-6 and ends up shoving into Celeburu's kings.
Yeah.
And players getting angry at Celeburu and giving him chips easily is going to be a recurring trend going forward. Celeburu's antics, now I say antics, I mean he puts in minimum bets, speed, like sloppy,
Yeah.
quick chip, place him in the pot, kind of half needling his opponents after he doubles up Sam Holden. Good hand, Nit. Stuff like that. So pretty fun stuff. We only actually got to see Kyle Karen in action for one hand. Now we'll get our fair share of Karen in a couple main events. You're dancing because it's. I mean, again, we'll get there. We'll get there. But we only really got a splash of Karen to start off this in 2012.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, and we will get there, but I just want to say, like, he comes off fine, in 2012. Like,
he does look so much younger without the sunglasses on, and just so much more like innocent and like naive or something,
Yeah, he grows up so fast.
We'll just go down the line here. So table 2, we get a very awkward, unorthodox hand between Selbst and Asare, where Selbst pays him off by virtue of just by how strange his bed sizing is. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you got third pair, and it's 500,000 chips you're dumping to him.
Yeah, I mean, Asare bets 500K on the end, and Selbst is completely befuddled. I mean, yeah, I think you gotta just move on. You gotta just fold.
And we had 3 million chips, so losing 1 million is not as big a deal, but it's a million. And considering how poorly her day 5 ends,
yeah,
she really could have used an extra 500,000 chips for day 6.
Yeah, absolutely.
But not to be outdone by, in my books, as controversial as far as hands, we get, again, somehow this main event finds a way to continually top itself with a more controversial hand after another one. So this hand might be one of the most important hands in the history of poker. And I'm dead serious when I say that, because on the other tables, Andras Koroknai and Gaelle Baumann get involved in a controversial ruling, controversial hand. Koroknai had earlier in day 5 doubled up through Baumann for a little over 1 million chips to get a chunk of her big stack. She had about 5 million by that point. Koroknai, and this is something he'd done multiple times, that tournament, misreading the table, not knowing whose action it was or who was left in the hand. Koroknai moved all in, thought that the hand had been over, and Baumann had supposedly, I'm not convinced she said call or something, but she was not out of the hand and she had kings. And so when Jack Ethel gets called in by the floor man to say what the ruling is, they only make Koroknai pay off the minimum raise of 60,000 that I guess Baumann had put in before his action had happened. And knowing how events will transpire later on in the main event, it's just such a killer outcome.
It just stinks. It really does. It's like, that's all I gotta say. I mean,
imagine it's about 1.3 million chips of Koroknai's that Baumann does not get. I mean, he might have lost the hand. I mean, I'm not saying kings are, but we can reasonably assume the outcome would have probably been that Koroknai's hands would not have, because if he had aced it, it would have been a whole new situation.
Yeah.
And my biggest beef is Koroknai's kind of response to when Baumann flashes the kings. He's like, like he knows he got away with it in a big way. Only losing a fraction.
The ripple effect of it is just so enormous. It's just incalculable. It's just this close. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I know I guess I hate to end this episode on a sour note, so we'll try to bring us back here, because Mr. Rapsoft kind of ironically gets killed by queens on the river against Jeremy Osmus to kind of circumvent the karma of busting Kevin Pollak with the queens versus queens hands.
That's true.
So we kind of come full circle on that mini plot line of day 5.
Yeah, and Lusk does bust in 102nd place.
Ace king of aces, brutal, and even the guy who busts him, just like he's sorry, aces.
That's true. Yeah.
Now this will not be the last time we see Lusk in the deep run of the main event. Not only does he make it to the final 3 tables in 2017, he does make a couple of middling cashes later on. So again, he's the Flying Dutchman here, very, very solid poker player. He is one of those guys that, of all the old school, or at least not old school, but players from the olden days of the ESPN classic main event coverage, still can put it up and not shut up.
Yep, and go buy his album.
And watch him box.
Yeah.
Oh, man, we made it, man. That was the first 12 episodes of the 2012 main event days 3 through 5. And
Yep.
again, I don't think there's a single dud in the whole batch.
Yeah, I think they're all pretty good episodes. I mean, obviously, some episodes are better than others. Some segments are better than others.
But I like to kind of highlight like one or two standout moments. I think pretty much every episode has one hand like that. If not, then pretty close to that sort of echelon of quality.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I mean, we didn't mention the bracelet segment. That's there. It happens just sort of very briefly. It doesn't really add much to the episode.
No.
Yeah. Though interestingly, they didn't mention Merson's bracelet when they didn't have that in the segment until I don't know if it's later on, but they didn't.
It's later. It's later.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, overall, yeah, I mean, I'd say this is a fairly strong start to this season. We have a good sense of pretty much all the major players, plus some of the minor people who don't have a deep run, but still have some character moments. Yeah.
I mean, my only real critique, really, besides some of the bits that we agree don't work, is that because the tables are being broken up so regularly, it's hard to kind of get that A to Z days events of narrative. But luckily, we get a lot of juicy, these sort of mini plots, kind of like when the meal is, the side dishes on a meal are so good that it's okay if the main course is not, A plus material. It's still a good meal. And although the spotlight had been mostly on Selbst and Susie Zhao to a smaller extent for the featured tables, we will get our fair supply of Gaelle Baumann and Elizabeth Hille coverage on day 6 onward.
Right.
And again, I'm starting to get some flutter from actual flutter in my heart from just thinking about day 7 going forward. But I'm really looking forward to discussing the back half of this main event.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited. I've already seen all of day 6, so it'll be
Yeah,
fun.
no, I have too, and I actually think that some of day 6 is maybe a little bit weaker than than some of the stuff we've talked about already. But nonetheless, I'm pumped to get there. And we've had, I want to say before we conclude things, we've had a great explosion of viewership on our podcast on YouTube. I have a lot of, thank you to everyone who listens to us ramble for an hour and a half at a time. It's been fun, and we are actually at the halfway point. I don't know if you realize this, Sam. We're at the halfway point of the podcast.
Yeah, I know. So it's all downhill from here. Just kidding. Yeah, I mean, feel free to leave any comments, questions that you'd like us to answer, your thoughts on the episodes themselves. I have a couple of ideas of what we could do after we're done with the main event. I'm happy to go back and revisit a couple tournaments. We mentioned the big one for One Drop that Esfandiari won. I'm happy to watch that and talk about that if that's something y'all are interested in doing. But if you have any ideas for that, let us know. If you ever see us playing poker, let us know. Just to give you all a heads up, the Mind Sports Olympiad, which I played in last summer, has announced new events in April and May. So they have, I think, something like, I'm looking here, 3, 5, looks like 11 different poker tournaments between April and May. They're calling it the MSO Grand Prix, and it's the sort of same function. You'll get a medal if you finish in the top 3 of each tournament, and then the overall person who has like the best overall score can also win a medal. So I'll be playing in that. I can't promise. Yeah, so it's all for free. They're running it in Europe, but it's on PokerStars, so anybody can play, but it'll be on like a European time. So it'll be like 6 p.m. Europe time, which would be like 12 a.m. or 12 p.m. American time. So yeah, I'll try to play as many of those events as possible. I can't promise that I'll play all of them, but I'll try to play at least 4 or 5 so I can qualify for the overall tournament.
Yeah, that sounds great. And again, so next time we'll be talking about the back half of the 2012 main event. I don't think it will be a very long break between this episode and the next one. We're already part way into our rewatch. Yeah. So that'll be great. And again, thank you for listening and enjoy your poker TV.
Yeah, have fun.